There's my record button. Okay,
It's
so I
okay.
think we're recording now. All right. You can, if you're watching this on recording, you can have someone fill you in on the first couple minutes. All right, we'll share again and we'll be right there and from current slide and we should be ready to roll. Okay, so we'll go through that list again. We all know, again, there are great benefits from studying music. Yes. Now, here's what's really interesting. Do you know who else claims all of these benefits? Athletics. You're exactly right. You probably knew I was going there. And this is true. And they have research to back their statistics up as well. So first of all, I just like to broach this topic in a way that says, hey, athletic teams and piano teachers / music teachers, we're actually trying to achieve the same goals and the same benefits. And I think that's really interesting. But what was even more interesting to me and what really sealed the deal for me was the fact that when I started researching this session, I realized very quickly that all of the topics we are most interested in studying as music teachers are also the topics that the athletic researchers are also interested in. So if you search up like the most popular current research topics in athletics, you are going to see things about performance anxiety. Oh, I think we've experienced that a time or two. Effective practice strategies, they're looking at that. They're looking at motivation, how to keep their students or their athletes motivated, how to keep them focused. That's a big one. Just overall kinesthetic movements of the body. They're trying to look for efficient movements, just like we are. And in general, just how to engage these 21st century students, right? Now, that's a big deal. The fact that we're all looking at the same things. So I hope that I've made my case, if nothing else, for the fact that, if nothing else, we should be looking at what they're looking at as well, so that we can learn what they're finding and vice versa, right? So I'm a pretty committed, I like research, right? So when I first started putting this program together, I reached out to a local colleague over at Ball State University, which is here in Muncie where I live. And I talked to Dr. Lindsay Blom, and Lindsay and I had several meetups where we just kind of talked through a lot of these ideas together. Lindsay is currently the graduate coordinator as well as the full professor of sport and exercise psychology at Ball State. She's also coincidentally built quite a name for herself in the, the athletic psychology genre. I've run into many people across the country that know exactly who she is. So I feel fortunate that we were able to put our heads together on these ideas. So I always like to give a shout out to Dr. Blom because I didn't really know what to expect for our first meetup. I wondered if she would feel at all like an air of superiority, that athletics were more important than music study, or, I don't know. I wasn't really sure what to expect. And actually, she was so warm and so encouraging of music. She has children of her own who study music. And it was quite interesting because I learned something really fascinating. Lindsay sits on several boards that kind of govern what's appropriate, in terms of like setting rules and policies for youth sports. And she told me that actually the governing boards that she's part of are actively seeking to reduce the number of days students are spending under a certain age anyway, in their particular sports. So there are some workarounds that some teams are finding, but she says that she's actually part of groups that are leading the charge, saying that, hey, kids need to do more than be at sports practice. So to me, I was like, oh my goodness, that's really exciting. We all know how involved those schedules can be. Now, we'll see what happens in the world, but I was really fascinated by that little tidbit of information. So here's the thing. Let's talk about team sports for a moment, shall we? I think, first of all, here's the ideal, right? This kid practicing his keyboard at soccer practice, right? But I feel like for a long time, we have been fed this story of the fact that students prefer team sports to their music lessons because they are social, right? And they have friends there, and that makes them social activities, and that makes them more appealing than a private piano lesson, right? Okay, there's definitely something to that for sure. But I actually think it goes deeper than that. So that's why I'm going to title this section Beyond the Social, because I have a theory that I'm pretty confident in that students, but not even just students, human beings want to know that they are part of something, right? Something bigger than themselves. And this is proven even just today. Like, look at you guys who are spending your Wednesday afternoon here on this Zoom call with me, yay, with your local association, being part of something, right? I know I don't have to talk to music teachers about how important it is that we get together, right? This is our like big feeding time, right? we need each other so much. And I think that that's a basic human need. I don't think we outgrow that. And I know kids need that. And so it goes a little bit beyond just social dynamics. And we're going to look at that strategically now. So I call this strategic play number 1 for building your enthusiastic piano teams at home, right? So we're going to talk about building a sense of interdependence amongst your students. So I don't know if you have ever heard about the self-determination theory. I first learned about it from Randy Faber. Randy Faber often speaks about this self-determination theory in his presentations. And he, if you don't know, did his doctoral research in human motivation. And so this theory comes up a lot because it basically says that if we want someone to really come into a full understanding, of, I'm not saying that very well, but if we want someone to really identify themselves as a musician, basically, then they need to achieve 3 things, okay? And the first level, we'll do this very quickly, is that they need to feel a sense of competence. 2, that they need to feel that they are related to an outside force or an outside group. And then 3rd, that they develop what we consider autonomy, or just the fact that, again, they will identify themselves as, hey, I am a musician. I am a maker of music. And that to me is one of my top goals as an independent piano teacher, right? What was interesting about this theory is, again, I've always had this running around through my brain. But when I met with Dr. Blom, my sports psychologist friend, she brought this up. Number 1, this was the first thing she mentioned was, have you ever heard of the self-determination theory? And again, it was just like the stars were all aligned. I was like, well, yes, I have. So that was a super quick overview on that. But I want to talk for a moment about roles, because in the end, I am convinced that one of the most successful aspects of team sports is the fact that, yes, you're part of a group, but also you know what your job is, and you know what other people's jobs are. And you understand that there is a give and take of that, and that you have expectations of others and they have expectations of you. And the compelling nature of the human psyche to want to meet that role is really important. So we'll think about this in a few different ways, but I think that when we think about going beyond the social, what we really want to be considering is what kind of roles have we developed in our studios. So here's what I've come up with. I've come up with 3 questions that your students and their parents need to be able to answer in order to have a clearly defined role in your studio. So I hope you are taking notes. I'm such a, I don't know, I just like to take notes that apply directly to me as I listen to these sessions. So feel free to tailor this and jot down any thoughts that come to mind in your specific situation. So first thing is, what is expected of me? Now, I think we're pretty good at this in general as piano teachers. I hope anyway, from lesson number 1 or interview number 1, that you are really clear about what you expect in terms of practice, in terms of how your students treat you, how they interact with you. But in general, anytime we can give students and their families clear parameters, I think it's appreciated, right? So that one's pretty simple. Number 2, this is a little more interesting, right? How am I contributing? I think your students need to know that they are contributing something to your studio. Now, that sounds self-serving, doesn't it? It's not that you need to have someone in charge of taking your trash out every week or something like that. But you need to make sure that you present their work as a way of contributing to the studio environment. And we're going to talk about a lot of different ways you can do that today. And then the third and maybe most interesting question I want you to think about from your students' perspective is, who is going to miss me if I am not here? So I'm going to tell you a story. And so this is many, many years ago now. And I had started a student, and she was with me for a few years, and we had a pretty somewhat rocky relationship because she was a really headstrong, I think she began when she was in maybe 3rd grade, and she was a super headstrong student, didn't have a problem arguing. She was really, tended to meet almost every one of my suggestions with quite a bit of resistance. But I liked her family and I knew she had potential, so we stuck it out. And there was a very clear turning point. She was in probably 7th grade at this point, and she came to her lesson one day and she told me that her hairdresser was looking for a piano teacher, and she wanted to know if I could, or if she could give her my information, right? Well, I handed her my business card and I said, yeah, just pass this along, let her know that, she can call me, but I have a wait list right now, but she's welcome to get on it. And my student, her eyes got so big and she was like, Mrs. Whitlock, you have a business card? As many people do, right? And I said, well, yes, here you go. Just pass it along, moving on. And she said, and you have a wait list? And I said, yeah. She's like, so what you're saying, I'll never forget her words. She said, what you're saying is that studying piano with you is like a thing, right? That's a thing. And I said, well, yeah, I guess it is a thing. I said, think about all of your friends who also study piano here. And she was like, oh, yeah. And it was so interesting. She pestered me with questions the rest of her lesson about this apparently legitimate business that I ran. She was so fascinated that this wasn't just something I did for fun. Of course, we've all experienced this, right? But what's so fascinating to me is that day was a very clear turning point in my relationship with that student. And she became infinitely more committed when she started to kind of open up her horizon and understand that she was part of something that was going on. I think sometimes our students feel from their perspectives that they come in the door, they punch their time card for 30 minutes and then they leave. And then, until next week, they come back again. They don't think about the fact that you are running a thing, right? So the idea of who will miss me if I'm not here becomes really important, especially at recital time when, we've all had those families that bail on the recital at the last second and they think that they're the only ones that are missing out, right? But actually we need to build this culture that, oh no, we're all missing out when students are not here. So again, that's a lot of what we're talking about today. The easiest way to build in these roles is obviously to get your students together in groups. These are really old pictures and I can't bring myself to update them because all of these faces are so precious to me, but this is my old studio years and years ago. But anyway, so I give whole presentations on group classes and how to facilitate making those happen. So that's not something we have time to tackle today for sure. But I would be happy to answer questions on that in email or whatever. But by and large, of course, in non-COVID times, getting your students together as much as possible. Mine meet approximately every 6 weeks or so. This is really important. Okay, so that's kind of obvious. But I also want to talk about 3 different ideas for you. And sometimes these can link arms and kind of work together. And you'll see what I mean. So I have 3 different branches of ideas that are going to help you build these roles within your studio. So first of all, I like to talk about the idea of having select performances. And select performances are basically just something that you put together for one group out of your studio. So this can be all of your earliest beginner students, or this can be all of your most advanced students, or this could be all of your students from a certain school, or what have you. I really like this in terms of as an opportunity to group my students according to their basic levels and abilities at the piano at this time. So I'll give you some examples as we go on. But I know we all get a little, a little nervous about kind of putting our students into like a rank or a, I don't know. But I want you to know that students compare themselves to one another regardless, right? Now, do I think we need to like tell them labels that we have put them into in terms of categories? No, I don't. But at the same time, there's something really interesting. Like, let's say you were working on a project and you had your most advanced students participating. Now that gives them a very clear idea that like, all right, I'm kind of in the upper echelon here, right? And then you give everyone else out here a sense of like, oh, okay, this is what I'm working towards, right? I'm working towards that upper group. And I know, again, sometimes we get a little like, ooh, is that going to hurt any feelings or make parents mad? But guess what? If we're making these sports parallels, we have all kinds of levels of sports, right? We have Pee-wee sports, we have Little League, we have junior varsity, we have varsity. I mean, kids can roll with this, I promise. And again, I do this in a very non-defined way. But anyway, maybe we need to look at examples first, and that will make more sense. But anyway, I do think there is something to be said for students understanding kind of where they fall, right? And of course, we all do studio recitals, occasionally through the year where they are seeing this, right? And I love recital days. I just think they're so good for 8 billion reasons. But that is often a great motivator, right? And when you have a student who is kind of underperforming for you, but then recital time is coming and they know they want to, show up for their friends and look like they're doing something more exciting, then we know that's motivating. So building in these ideas along the way is a great thing to do. Okay, so let's also talk about the idea of a complete works recital or performance, which definitely kind of holds hands with select performances as well. So this is when you have a certain group of your students work on one particular project or, for instance, group of pieces, whether that's large or small. So this could be something as simple as, okay, we're going to have a group class at the end of November. And, let's say I have 5 students in Piano Adventures. So, okay, we're going to play the first half of the performance book. And I'm going to let so-and-so play the first song and so-and-so play the second song. And they're going to know this, right? And if that was the case, then guess what? Your students understand their role, right? And so you're having this group class at the end of November. You say, all right, you're responsible for, Jack and the Beanstalk, whatever. And that student knows that, hey, I've got to go to class at the end of November and I'm going to play Jack and the Beanstalk. That, again, gives your student that very clear role, and they know exactly what they're working for, and they know how they fit in the sequence because they know Susie's going to play Showboat and, whatever, right? Can't remember my favorite performance pieces all of a sudden, but there we have it. So I'm going to show you more examples of that momentarily, but let me also just mention really quickly that service projects, obviously, are just looking for opportunities that you can have your students work together towards one goal that's going to benefit the community, right? This has a great way of working itself back into some unwanted or unplanned for publicity that is positive. And we'll show some examples here soon. I should say, I know, like, I'm not saying you have to do all of these things. Please know that. I'm just trying to get your ideas spinning as to ways that you can work to interconnect your students some more. Okay, I'm not telling you that you have to organize 6 fundraisers a year for the local orphanage or something. We don't have orphanages anymore. Anyway, we're going to get rid of that. So here is the deal. Let me give you one example of a performance we put on a few years ago where all 3 of those projects were kind of like crammed into one. So I had a select students of Whitlock Piano Studio present Burgmuller Opus 100 in its entirety. So Burgmuller Opus 100 is 25 pieces. It contains the all famous Arabesque, the Ballade, Tender Flower, all of those, right? And I'm kind of obsessed with that collection. Most piano teachers recognize the benefit of Burgmuller Opus 100. And I just had this great collection of teenagers and a few of my adult students that jumped in, and we each learned, most of them learned 2 pieces from that collection. Many of them, of course, had played them already, but we cycled around to new pieces and we just presented it in one recital from start to finish. And I could talk to you all day about the benefits of this recital. It was so great. So first of all, obviously I have all those nice, sweet faces there that were part of this project. I think I had maybe 12 people involved altogether. But here's some of my students that were at performance class one night. So what we did is we had like probably 3 or 4 dress rehearsals or performance classes, whatever you want to think of them as, where these students came to my studio and they all played them for each other, and they would have their scores out and they would follow along with each other. And so because of that, by the end of this, every single one of these students in this picture can tell you like the technical merits of all 25 of those pieces. They know them in their ears. They can tell you why they're important and why they're good for pianists. And I can just guarantee you that any of these students that end up teaching in the future will be fairly well prepared to teach those 25 pieces. And that's pretty exciting to me. The other thing that I found really interesting was that the students, every single one of them came to me unsolicited and told me how much they loved that project. And, you know, there are certainly some pieces in the collection that are bigger than others, but for the most part, they just loved kind of being on an equal playing field. Like they really felt, I thought, you know, some of them are used to standing out a little more than others. And I thought that they would miss that, but they didn't. They really felt, of all of our performances, most of these kids, when they graduated, all told me that this was their favorite concert. And that made me feel really special. And several of those players were playing pieces far beyond Opus 100, but it's still worth them performing pieces that are lighter, right? That's a soapbox issue of mine, that our students shouldn't always feel like they have to play the next hardest thing, but they should enjoy playing, you know, pieces of many levels of difficulty, right? So anyway, I think that's really interesting. And I had, I'll confess, a stroke of genius when I put this recital together, because I saw it as a unique opportunity to involve the younger students as well. So what I ended up doing is there's 25 pieces in Opus 100, and I assigned all 25 pieces individually as listening assignments to younger students in the studio. And I gave them each a canvas, or it wasn't even a canvas, it was just a piece of cardstock. And I had them create original artwork for each of the pieces, right? So these are just a couple of examples. But you can see my student that made this cute little frog for the clear stream, this painting we had for consolation, and my Austrian dance student did this cute little circus, like 3D collage. It was super cute. And so what did we do? During the recital, as my students played their piece, I had a couple of students in charge of bringing the next, I had an easel sitting in front, and I had a student come up, bring the artwork up, and they would trade it out for the next and the next and the next. And so now here's the deal. It's pretty smart. It got all of my students there, right? It was a select recital for my stronger players, but yet everyone was there because they wanted to see their artwork on display and get all the accolades for their nice artwork, right? So we did that. And then all of the younger students got to see that, oh, wow, this group of kids got to put on their own concert, and, and look how great it was. And it was so smooth. Again, just life lessons coming out their ears. And you know how competitive parents can be for their kids. So that starts this new expectation of like, oh, when does my child get to play in the elite recital, or whatever you want to bill it as, right? And I just think, in general, I've done this many times, but this particular event just holds a very special place in my heart. So we also, I mentioned service projects. We just took up a collection for a local organization that fed hungry families on Thanksgiving. And we ended up collecting so much money that I got all kinds of publicity for that that I did not expect. I was just trying to do something nice with the crowds that I had gathered. So I always say that just because, good things can come from, good deeds, right? Anyway, so that I hope just gives you a few ideas of things that you could do. So the idea of selecting your students, putting them into smaller groups and letting them kind of work together towards something, or having your students do a complete work. So I'll give you another example. This last year, COVID made it challenging, but I had a group of later elementary students work through Jason Sifford's collection called Waitlist. I love Jason Sifford's collections in general, but Waitlist was new a couple years ago, and there's 10 pieces in that collection, I think, and I had 10 students each learn one piece from that book, and then we recorded it in front of a green screen. So they got to be like floating through outer space and things. That's all kind of it's astronomy themed pieces. And that was so fun because, again, students see like, oh, I'm in charge of playing, Sea of Tranquility. And then, oh, I wonder who's playing Space-Time. And oh, I wonder who's playing, what have you. So it's just a very interesting thing. So if you've never tried having all of your students play from the same collection, or a small group of students playing from the same collection, give it a try and see if you can get them together, even if it's just something really small and informal. It's just kind of fun. I would really encourage you to think about it. Okay, we're going to breeze through parental roles really quickly, but again, just like your students want to know what their role is, parents also want to know what their role is as well, right? So again, from lesson number 1 or interview number 1, you certainly want to make sure that your parents understand what you expect of them and how you expect to be treated. But I think it's also okay to ask parents to help you out in certain occasions, right? So let's talk about recitals, for instance. I really like my recitals to be pretty much run by me in the fact that I want parents to be able to come and enjoy it and leave and not feel like they have to stay to clean up and do all that stuff, right? At the same time, there are some ways that you can preserve that and have parents still involved. So for instance, you can ask, if you have a really artsy craftsy parent and you want to ask them to create a centerpiece or a display for your snack table, it's interesting how those little kinds of roles will really make sure a parent, follows through on their commitment to the recital, right? So if you have a few students that you're worried about bailing on you at the last second, give them a job, tell them they're going to be program passer outers, and that's a job that if they do flake out, it's not going to hurt anything, right? But it might be just enough for the parents and the families to be like, oh yeah, we have a job today. We're passing out programs, or I'm decorating the snack table, or, I don't know, I'm giving an introduction, or whatever it's going to be. Have you ever seen when kids volunteer to be on the homecoming dance committee or whatever, like those parents end up doing all the work. I'm here to tell you, maybe you've experienced it. So parents are willing to get involved. They really are. It's a dicey territory, I know, because parents are paying us to do these things. So you don't want to get overly demanding either. But just think about ways in which you can involve parents in just more like emotionally supportive parameters. All right, so moving on real quick to what we're going to call your studio locker room. I don't know if any of you travel teach. This gets a little trickier if you're traveling, but I'm assuming most of you have a physical studio location. And you've probably never likened it to a sweaty, smelly locker room before, but here I am to twist things up on you again with my sports analogies. So I was really intrigued by this picture from the Hofstra women's lacrosse team locker room. First of all, that is a nice locker room, isn't it? So we're going to see a few things here that I think help play a really important role in your students and how they perceive your lesson experience. All right, so the first thing I notice is this idea that tradition never graduates, right? I am ultra obsessed with the idea of legacy in what we do. I'm fascinated by the fact that we are all products of teachers who had teachers who had teachers who had teachers who said all the things that we say today, right? And I just love that. And I love my students to understand their part in that whole trajectory as well. So that means that I talk about legacy a lot. It means that I have pictures of my teachers in my studio where they can see them and I can say, hey, these were my teachers. And then we can talk about who their teachers were. It means that I have photos of students who graduated in the past hanging on my walls. I think I have, there it is. Old, outdated, but this is a portion of my senior wall. So these are just pictures of kids who have graduated my studio and they get their picture on the wall when they graduate. So, hey, that's pretty fun. And students love to come in and they spend their piano careers looking up at these faces. And then we all know how it happens. Eventually, all too fast, they join the wall themselves. So I just like to reinforce that concept of legacy anytime I can. You'll also notice in this locker room that we have individual acknowledgement, right? Do you see how each person has their jersey hanging? Now, I know we all have varying degrees of space to work with, but I think it's really important, or I don't know, it's not essential or anything, but I think it's very motivating for students to see that, oh, like I have a place here next to all these other people, right? So very simply, I do this. This is still my setup, although it's on a different wall. I take pictures every fall of my students and I just hang them clothesline style this way. Now, again, like that's really easy. I could do it much more elaborately if I wanted to spend some more time and money on it. But anyway, but look, they're all so darling. I'll give you a close up just so you know what I do. Every year I ask a question on my board and students fill out like what they feel, right? So, or what they answer the question. So this is Nate saying that playing music makes him feel awesome. She feels empowered, fulfilled. Isn't that so great? I mean, I stare at these things all the time because they're just, I don't know, they're so dear. I love my students so much. So anyway, I have those hanging in my studio. And students love looking at those. I mean, they just love it. So they love coming in, even if you just have, I don't know, like years ago, I used to just have like a copy of my schedule, like on a dry erase board. And I would notice how my students would come in and it would be a big deal, like so they could find the names of their friends. I was like, why do you care, you know, to find your friend's name on this schedule on my wall? But I really think this is it. It's that they are finding, you know, this common ground that like, oh, you know, my friend comes here and so do I. They get to know each other through recitals and events and group classes. And they love spotting those people, right? It's just a thing. So I think that's really great. We also noticed the branding, of course, the Hofstra H there. We could talk a lot about like studio swag, like people who put their studio like on a pen or a t-shirt or a whatever. I don't do a ton of this. And at the same time, there's some merit there because again, it just continues to enforce to parents and to students that you are a thing, right? As we've been saying. Oh, and I'll tell you what, one more quick thing. I do like to focus on the idea of a team photo, right? I don't see one in this locker room, but I bet it's on the other wall. So if you've ever had a child in sports, or if you know anyone in sports, team picture day is a big deal, right? So students will do everything they can, and parents will do everything they can to make sure that students do not miss the team photo. We know, like my daughter ran cross country this year, and some of the kids were out on COVID quarantine during the team photo, and they rescheduled it because we can't have people missing in the team photo, right? That was so great. Now, from a studio perspective, I think it's really great to get a team photo. So I do this at my recitals. I only do one full large, like formal recital in the spring. And so that's when we take our team photo and everyone looks nice. I do it before the performances start. So shirts are all still tucked in and everything. I don't know if you can see it over my shoulder, but I display it. That's like a 16 by 20 print, I think. So I blow it up really big every year. And I use that photo like crazy. So I use it on, I send out a studio Christmas card every year. I'll include it on social media posts. I will put it in emails, in like year-end review videos that I do. I don't know, I just use that team photo a lot. And as I do that, it just over the years, you know, it won't happen right away, but little by little, like parents start to be like, oh, like, because if their kid's missing out of that picture, then they're missing out of it all year long, right? And they see it all the time. And they're like, oh, where's my kid? And so what I have found is that one photo makes a big difference when it comes to prioritizing recital attendance for families. I know, again, that's a sore spot for a lot of us, but it's kind of funny, comical even, how much that matters. So those are a few things. I want to make sure that we also have time to chat. So I'm going to zoom us through a few different ideas. I think we're not going to worry so much about this, but let's talk really quickly about evaluation, because this is where sports probably are doing things a little bit, I don't want to say better, but maybe more effectively than we are. So when it comes to providing your student evaluation, we all know that music is such a subjective art, right? So there's very little we can quantify, but I want you to work really hard in your feedback to your students and in their assignments and goals and expectations. We want to look for things that we can measure as much as possible. And so there are just a few things that come to mind that we can measure. One of them is metronome markings, right? And I know, like, believe me, I'm not a proponent of like overusing the metronome. I certainly, it has its place, of course, right? But also, anyway, you can practice incorrectly with the metronome is what we'll say. And I'm not a fan of that. But if we do, as we work to talk to our students about developing phrases more fluidly, for instance, it can pay off for us to say like, all right, now I want you to make sure, that you're aiming for a goal of X, that we're aiming for this at 116. Or whatever it may be, right? Not that they have to go home and then just drill at 116 all day, but that they have a goal in mind, right? I was really floored one day. I had this piano student who was sort of a friend of the family, and she also was in ballet, and she was always underperforming for me. She just didn't practice quite enough, and she darling girl, really sweet. Our lessons were fun, but she just didn't really ever up her game like I wanted her to. And I was at her house one day because we were family friends, and she wanted to show me something in her room. And beside her bed, she had this dry erase board. And on it, it had like this list of stretches that she had to do for ballet. And it was like, hold this kind of stretch for 30 seconds, do this 10 times, do that. Like it was a checklist, right? And I made a comment about it. She's like, oh yeah, I do that every day because it's right there. And I was like, well, like I give you a list in your notebook every day or every week, but I'm like, man, you don't do that. And I realized it's because it's really clear and measurable to say, all right, you're going to do 20 seconds of a plank and then, you know, whatever, I don't know, whatever stretches she was doing. So just think about that, will you? Some things can't be measured, but if you are comfortable in you know, whatever student situation you're saying of like, hey, I want you to do this 10 times a day. That doesn't always apply. I know that, but sometimes it can. So I want you to think about it. We also want to make sure that we are clearly communicating our goals, right? Because here's one thing that I found really interesting. I have a student who's a swimmer. If you know, you know, because swimmers are very serious. I think it's one of the largest committal sports in my mind anyway. And it's just really intense, right? And when she finished her season, whatever it was, when she finished her season, her coach gave her the times he expects her to swim her races in the next year. Like a full year ahead, he said, all right, by next spring, you are going to be swimming, you know, this meter at this time. And that spurred her on for the whole year. I was like, wow, that is really interesting, right? I do like to set clear goals for my students, but I know that I haven't always. So if you aren't setting like clear, like, okay, hey, by the summer, I expect us to be able to do, you know, X, Y, or Z, you know, you should think about that, right? You also want to make sure that students feel like they have things that they can work on day to day. Because when you're, you know, for instance, when you're running, like you're timing yourself each day. Sometimes we kind of say like, all right, by next week, I want you to do this. And by next week, do this. But that doesn't really always help our students get through the day to day. So think about that. And lastly, this is just interesting that research definitely shows, like if you are one who's into incentives, I do very few anymore, but if you do any kind of contest or any kind of incentive program, students are very clearly more motivated when the reward is for a group versus when it's individual. So when if you can have a group of students working to see if they can earn more points than this group of students over here, science shows us that that is going to be more motivating than, oh, let's see, you know, who can practice the most minutes this month or whatever, right? And that is true because if you've ever, at least in my experience, because with individual incentives like that, I'll have a few students who like zoom ahead of everyone else. And then everyone else like realizes that they'll never catch this person and they're like, oh, well done. But if you're part of a group, then there's always hope, right? And you don't want to let your group down. And that's why those tend to be more rewarding. All right, so I'll tell you what, I want to make sure we can chat a little bit today. So I am going to fast forward here. You know, I love watching my students love each other. It's one of the greatest like side benefits of the studio that I run. I have students who like, if they end up at an event together, I teach in an area where we have lots of different school districts. And so a lot of them don't go to school together, but they know each other from piano. So I'll get these pictures from like homecoming dances and things, and they'll be like, hey, we took a studio photo. And I just think that's so cute that they even think to like, oh, let's take a picture and send it to Mrs. Whitlock. You know, that's a really side bonus of teamwork in the studio that I just love. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. If you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, I love talking to teachers. So it's what the whole podcast is about. You can email me. It's on the bottom of this slide. You can just email at beyondmeasurepodcast@gmail.com. You can also listen to the podcast. And like I said, if you're not sure how to do that, then let me know. I'll help you. All right. I think I will stop sharing so I can see all of your lovely faces again. And we'll see if we can come up with some questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to chat about? Yes, Amy, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Christina. Wow, a wealth of information, and it's amazing. You just have so much, so many detailed things that we can apply to ourselves. One thing I had a question. I really love the idea about the Bergmuller concert that you did. I think that's just
Mhm.
or something like that. What a great idea. One thing I was wondering, did you pick the piece for the student, or did the student pick that specific piece?
Wow, that's an excellent question. I did pick. In general, I I do like to let my students choose repertoire, and we'll do the whole like, here's two choices, you pick one, a few times a year. But for the most part, I really name it most of the time. And so with that particular collection, I had to be really strategic, and I had to have the right group. And that particular year, I had just the right mix of students that I knew I could get all of them done really well. But of course, there are some that are lighter and some that are more challenging. And what was really great about that is I had a couple of students that I kept trying to claw into a higher frame of mind, and they weren't going there. And when they got invited to be part of that group, then all of a sudden they were like, all right, now I'll step it up a little bit. And so they got to play the lighter pieces, because I knew that I was pushing it just a little bit. Of course, everyone wanted to fight over the ballade and arabesque and that kind of thing. It was a big like, who's going to get to do that? But in the end, yeah, I did. I assigned those, and everyone was happy. Though that's very much a point of pride for me, as I work very hard to put students in the right repertoire, and I try to make sure I'm always giving them things they would love. The other thing I would say about that is that you always want to have a backup plan with those complete works projects. And so, for instance, I did have one student that was supposed to play two pieces and only really got one ready. And I just played the other one, which was a win too, because of course it's always fun to play for your students too. So I just told myself that from the get-go. So if somebody got sick or somebody bailed on it, I would just play it, and life was going to go on. And fortunately, I only had to play one, so it would have not been fun if I was playing 12 of them.
Yeah.
So,
Do you use that? You said you only do one recital a year, but do you do that like in the fall or something, or what?
yeah. So I only do one like full, like large scale formal sit down recital in the spring. But yes, I usually do like a select performance in the fall. I've got, COVID's been nuts. And I have kids, my girls are 5 and 11. So life's a little like, oh, right now. So this fall, I'm not doing one. And then we do nursing home performances, and we do a masterclass in February before performance season kicks in with all their festivals and everything. And, so we do perform in smaller groups and in different, less formal settings all year. But the big formal shebang is in the spring. And that's been successful for me just because we don't overdo it, and parents really do look forward to it. And that's where we do awards for longevity and all of that as well. So.
Okay, great.
So just kind of jumping off of that, and by the way, Christina, thank you so much. This was so good. I just loved hearing.
Oh, good.
But you also mentioned for your later elementary, was it waitlist? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Who was?
Yeah. Do I have it sitting here? I'm never far without it. I love it so much. Yes, that's Jason Sifford. I can put it in the chat if you want.
Great.
And yeah, so Jason, if you don't know Jason's compositions, he's got some really good stuff out there. So I would encourage you to look at a lot of his collections. He's got a really cool book called Beware the Jabberwock that I love, which some really just cool like illustrative pieces. And he just released 2 books of pieces called Key Bop. 1 and 2. Those are his new books for this year. And they're elementary, like jazzy pieces that are just really high quality and great accompaniments and that kind of thing. So anyway, he's not even paying me to say this, but but anyway, he's really great. And so we did that green screen project this year that was really fun, or last year. Some of it spilled over into this year, and that was a good time. So, but I always think like here's one of my visions that hasn't come to fruition yet, but like, wouldn't it be cute to do like a Mother's Day tea with like the little kids, like all playing through like Martha Meir book 1 or something, like the best of Martha Meir book 1, a studio favorite of mine. I'll put that in the chat too, since I'm saying it. She's got there's more books in that collection, but a lot of my littles like that book 1. And, like, wouldn't that be cute if we just had like a couple of families come and they play? I don't know, but it's also Mother's Day and I don't want to work that hard. So maybe later, maybe another day.
Yeah. A little group project that a bunch of kids played together. It was called The Magical Forest. I don't know if you've
Yes, Nancy Lau, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was so great too. I just loved it. It was so sweet. And like just what you were saying, like the kids like really work together when they know like they're part of this bigger group together. So it was really fun and we need to do it again. I just, there's a few things going on. So sorry to
Just a little. Yeah, that's the thing. It is. It's just so good for students to feel like they're. I don't know. I think that's what the sports is. I think it's that they know they're working towards the same goal together, and that's really exciting. And some kids do really well with individual piano practice that they're competing against themselves, and that's it. But not everybody is that way.
Right.
Do you have, see, when I do group, I get kind of frustrated because I feel like I'm in the parental role sometimes.
Yes.
There's not, I mean, even just 2, I just sometimes have 2 in my studio and I'm like, would you stop playing? I mean,
hands off the piano. I know. That's definitely a tough one.
Yeah, with big groups, what do you do? How do you handle that with like younger students? I'm not talking about more.
Sure. Well, so I'll tell you what. So my like 6 weeks-ish groups classes that I run, so I call them performance classes because that communicates like a formal goal to the parents. They don't think it's just us sitting around having fun. And there is a performance element, which helps with time. I meet for an hour with students that replaces their lesson for that week. And they come and play for each other. And it's always sort of like works in progress. Like we don't make it a huge deal, but they're, so they sit and they listen to their friends play. So that takes up a good chunk of it. And in that way, there's only one piano. I don't have a keyboard lab in my studio. So, they're on the floor. Sometimes they're rolling around. It's pretty comical. Sometimes we'll like take photos and like legs will be up in the air while someone's playing. And I'll be like, her mom will be like, what was he doing? And I'm like, I don't know. But really, in general, it does teach them to sit and listen to each other play and to think, because then we always, give compliments to each other and they have to give specific feedback. It can't just be, that was good. And so we do a little bit of that. And so that helps because they don't all have their hands on an instrument. And otherwise, it's just really careful planning. And I have different strategies. Like some years I'll just put all the crazies together so that I just know I'm going to have one crazy hour. And I just tell myself, I'll get through it. And sometimes I dole them out so that, whatever. But most of the time I prefer just to get it done. And we just, when you frame it as, okay, we're just going to get together and, and spend time together and, try to learn something, then this too shall pass, That is so funny. So yeah, ladies, I'm so happy you are all here today. Thank you so much. I do have a student that should be darkening my door any second, so I should probably dash. But I appreciate you all so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Christina. It's just been a wealth of information, and check out her podcast. Yeah, and it's wonderful. I enjoy listening
Oh,
to it. Also, I need to know how to figure out how to write comments, because you were talking about that, in your last birthday one, and I was like,
yes.
I don't know where to write the comment.
Well, that's fine. I can let you know. I'll send you an
Yeah,
email.
yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Amy. That's so sweet. Jill, I appreciate the invitation so much. I wish we could all be together, but one of these days.
Yeah. Thanks
Right,
for doing
that's
that.
right.
I really
Well, thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much, Christina. I appreciate it. And,
Thank you all so much. I think so. I don't know if I think the recording will come to my end, so I can send that on to you guys later.
yeah, if you don't mind, that would be great. I don't know how you want, if we can share it with our Facebook community. I
Yeah,
would have it on there, but if you'd rather just keep it private, we could do that too. So,
that's fine. We'll figure it out, won't we? All right, ladies. Thank you so much. I wish you all a happy Wednesday.
Thank
thank
you.
you. All right,
Thanks.
everyone. We will talk to you later, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for